All right. So last week we were talking, started talking about Abram and these things that we can learn from his life that I believe God wants each and every one of us to learn also, and things that are really things that we need to understand in order to walk with God in a way that is, honoring Him and giving Him the honor, the glory that He deserves. Last week, talking about altars and with the promise of God, and with what He does, what He speaks to us, that you see throughout the Bible, but here with Abram, this place of God speaking, talking to him, giving him a promise, and then Abram, before he was Abraham, and then even after and throughout the Bible, that there was this moment of consecrating ourselves and building an altar before God, and just basically laying yourself before Him, saying, God, it's only you, it's all you, and I give you the glory. So making that altar, and really in us and how we do it, right? We don't kill animals and place them on an altar. We put ourselves on the altar and lay down before Him and say, God, I consecrate myself before you. And today I'm going to be talking about tents, and we see in Abram's life also that after a certain point, he went and journeyed and went where God told him to go and dwelt in tents. Tents speak of movement, of transition. They speak of being flexible, and our attitude toward change, which is not that easy for some of us. Funny story, I guess it's funny. I watched a documentary, it was a long time ago actually, probably in the early 2000s, and about Mongolia. Anybody know a little bit about Mongolia? No? Above China, below Russia, it's in the middle. The people's actually a mixture of those people. So it's like an in-between country, in between those. And of course, we know some from history about the Mongols and, all the stuff that I guess we've been taught. But it's very interesting watching this documentary. And I was like, oh, Tori, I want to go to Mongolia. I was like, it just seems so cool. And I don't know, it's just like this place where the people, most or many of them, are nomadic. They live in tents. They're herders, and they just set up shop and have their herds and live. But then when it's time to go, they just pick up everything that they own and move on to the next place and go. And Tori's like, what about that? It's like, it's beautiful. I mean, look at the mountains, the place. I don't know. I just want to go. But it was just this interesting thing to me. And now I just want to say, Tori, I think it's biblical. It's, okay. Anyway. But we see, like, it seems so odd to us, but we see here with Abram that he ended up living the rest of his life this way. And when we come to Genesis 12:1, it says, now the Lord had said to Abram, get out of your country, from your family, and from your father's house to a land that I will show you. Now, it's interesting because this is spoken here, and it says the Lord had said. And what this is saying, and I didn't even realize this until like really studying in depth with it, but actually we see in Acts 7 that the Lord had spoken this to Abram much longer before this moment here. Because we see in Acts 7 and verse 2, and we have Stephen speaking, God using him to speak to people, and it says that he started speaking, he said, "Brethren and fathers, listen, the God of glory appeared to our father Abraham when he was in Mesopotamia, before he dwelt in Haran." Now this time in Genesis, whenever it says this, he was in Haran. So he's saying he spoke this before when he was in Mesopotamia. In verse 3, "and said to him, get out of your country and from your relatives and come to a land that I will show you. Then he came out of the land of the Chaldeans and dwelt in Haran. And from there, when his father was dead, he moved him to this land in which you now dwell." So in Genesis 12 here, where we're looking at, it's actually this repeating of the promise of the God, the calling out, the calling that God gives to Abram. It's not exactly when he said it the first time. This is just when it kind of started to happen. And we see, when we look here in this verse in Acts, it says from there, when his father had died. Do you remember, do we want to go back to Genesis 12:1? "Now the Lord had said to Abraham, get out of your country, move, go from the country that you live in now, from your family, and from your father's house, to a land that I will show you." And we see, I don't know about you, but this kind of hits me hard, because like I think back now and like things that God has spoken to me, and I'm like, okay, God, I'm gonna do this, and you've spoken it to me, and then you like halfway do it. You kind of like, it's like, but you're not fully giving all. Now, Abram actually started on that journey, but it was with his father and with Lot. It's very interesting to me, because God told him to leave his father's house, to leave his family. And he started the journey, but not exactly as God had spoken. So God repeated the promise, or it's repeated here in Scripture. And Abraham's partial obedience didn't take the promise of God away, but we see, I'm assuming, because I don't know exactly when God wanted to do this in his life, but I think we can see that the delay of God's promise is because Abram didn't obey exactly what the Lord had said. See, God challenged him to go. He challenged him to get out of that place that he was comfortable. He challenged him. And what does this mean? Like to get out of your father. It's like, it doesn't mean that you have to leave your family and never talk to them again in order for God to use you, or you can't live in a house in order for God to use you. But what I do believe that it means is that we can't get so comfortable and so stuck in the ways that we are living that when God speaks something, we aren't able to do it. That when he says go, I was talking to somebody here recently and actually about this and just saying, I mean, it's like, you say, like, if I was put on the spot, or if I was, somebody, is like, renounce God, or I'm going to do whatever to you. And we say, yeah, I would do that. But you don't know until you're put in that place. And we can say all this about, like, yeah, God, whatever he says, I'm going to do it. And then he tells you to leave and go from where you're, to leave. Get outside is what he said of your family, that place where you're comfortable, a place where you know exactly where everything is. And you know the provision is there. You know where your meal's going to come from. You know where the finances are going to come from and where they are and how safe you are. This place of just understanding and knowing everything, and it just gets us in this place where we're trusting in the things instead of trusting on God. So he calls him out. Abram starts the journey, but he takes his father and Lot. They are going with him. And we see that it's many years. And then his father died. And then all of a sudden, I don't know if it's that he remembered this promise, this call of God, if it's that God re-spoke it, whatever it was. I just am thinking, like, God, let me not be in the place where you have to remind. I think this is what this scripture is telling us. Where you have to remind me because I didn't obey the first time. Because he stayed in his father's house. That word means a dwelling place, a place with a foundation, a place that doesn't just, you can't just pick it up and move it with you. It's a place that is permanent. And in Hebrews 11:8, it says by faith, it talks, we see he's talking about Abram's faith. It says, by faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to the place which he received as an inheritance, and he went out not knowing where he was going. By faith, he dwelt in the land of promise as in a foreign country, dwelling in tents with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs with him of the same promise, for he waited for a city which has foundations, whose builder and maker is God. We see here in Hebrews 11 where it speaks of Abraham and speaks even of his great faith. And we don't see, I love that doesn't have this little caveat in it, or that like after, he finally realized that he was delaying the promise of God, or after he finally trusted him and went out. But it just says, so it speaks. See, God's promise, his call didn't get removed, but maybe sometimes we can delay it a little bit. But from the moment he responds to the call, it says that he never again settled down in a tent or in a home. He lived in tents. Seems crazy. I know, but maybe he just realized what he had done. I don't know. This is me, my kind of looking into it. Maybe this is it. Probably I'd be scared too. If I finally realized years and years later that God had given this call and this promise, and I hadn't obeyed, I hadn't done exactly what he said, and so that thing was pushed off. And so I'm like, man, I don't want to get into a place where I'm too comfortable. I don't want to get in a place. I'm not going to build a house with a foundation, brick and mortar, this place that I can feel so secure in myself. Again, I'm reading into this a little, but I just think maybe he's like, look, I'm going to live in a tent and go where God tells me to go. And what I'm waiting for is a city which has a foundation whose builder and maker is God. It's not going to be made by me. It's not going to be something that I can build for myself. But I'm looking for that city, that place that God has made, not that I have made. He didn't dwell in a place having a foundation, the security of the finances, the comfort of the family surroundings. Does any of that sound familiar? I think it should, because all of us could raise our hands if we ask. It's like, what are the things that we think about and want to find that comfort and security in? It's those things. But when we have those things, how easy is it to be comfortable, to be secure in things that God hasn't spoken to us or hasn't given us or hasn't promised us? And so much harder to step out in what he is speaking. See, he wants us to be flexible. I mean, it's not that we're a pushover either. You know, there's a way and how we should be that's this kind of like a rigid flexibility. Right? Like there's many things. Like let's just say a bow, an arrow. Bow is rigid, but it's flexible enough to be used. And actually the power comes from the flexibility. That how much the strength there is in the flex, the pull. Not being too much of a pushover, because that way there's no strength when the string pushes the arrow back, but not too rigid where there can be some pull in order to shoot the arrow. And that perfect balance is what creates the power that is pushed into the arrow. So there's this rigid flexibility, if you will. But if we're too rigid and we're pushed, what happens? We just break. If we're too flexible, we're just pushed over. We just do whatever. Anybody can do whatever they want with me, right? But that's not how we're supposed to be. But God is wanting some flexibility, wanting us to be a little bit uncomfortable. God spoke. He was speaking to Abram, and he says in verse 3, he says, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Now, he speaks to him, he says, all the families of the earth shall be blessed. And in this, he is giving this preview, this prophetic word, this speaking to Abraham about the immensity of the calling that he is speaking to him. Because he doesn't just say that your family will be blessed. He said he is speaking to him About, I need you. I need you to do what I'm asking you to do because actually you are a part of my plan for the entire world. That years and years later come from your obedience and your faith that something will happen that will change everything. So he doesn't say this to him, but he says, I'm going to send my son to die on the cross for the sins. And not only your family will be blessed, but each and every family in the entire world can be blessed through what I want to do. I don't know, our calling may not be that or exactly what he spoke to Abraham, but can we see that each and every one, he is speaking the same thing to us because I'm telling you, if we listen, if we understand, if we go when he says to go, families will be blessed. People will be blessed. Things will happen, and it won't be because of us, but because God and what he's doing through each and every one of us. But will we go? Well, caveat here says, verse 4, Genesis 12:4, so Abraham departed as the Lord had spoken to him, and Lot went with him. And Abraham was 75 years old when he had departed from Haran. He's 75 years old now, departing, finally moving on. But do you see that actually he still is not fully obeying God? What did God tell him? He told him to go out of your father's house. Get out from your family because your family, it's not, your family's not bad. I don't know. But they're going to cause some trouble or cause you to not step into what you have called you to. And Lot went with him. And I don't know what this moment was, if he asked Lot, if Lot asked him, but Lot went with him, and what we see in that, what comes of that is Lot actually causes a lot of trouble for Abraham. It's a lot of stuff that he has to deal with, and the way that I see it is that there was another place where he was now is stepping out after his father died. So really it's like, is it, is it just because? But how many times do we when this happens, then I will do this. Or when we step out to do what God's called us to do, but I'm also going to bring along this person for security, for comfort. And I believe God wants to say to us, listen, there's not going to be comfort in bringing that person that I didn't ask you to bring. It's actually going to be a burden to you. It's actually going to be something that you will have to deal with later on that you don't really want to have to deal with, but you will because you didn't obey like I asked you to obey. You didn't do what I asked you to do. We see even as we go to Numbers, we're going to go to Numbers 9, verse 16, and where God is leading the people of Israel, and they've been in captivity. What really, you might think how was that comfortable? But you see even later that they asked if they could go back because it was known. They knew what was going to happen. Maybe they'll be mean to us, but at least I know where I lived, where my food was going to come from, where my beating was going to come from, whatever, where my pain was going to come from. I'd rather know where it's going to come from than step out into the unknown. But somehow that was comfortable to them, and that was their dwelling place with a foundation. And God brings them out of that, and now they're in this place where He is leading them. In Numbers 9:16, it says, "So it was always The cloud covered it by day, and the appearance of fire by night. The presence of God was there by a cloud and by a pillar of fire right there over the tabernacle, and it was there. And what it says is, so it was always. He was always there. What he wanted to see is if the people would always be there where he was. So he's doing this thing where he's pulling them out, just like he was pulling Abraham out. And the same thing with the children of Israel. And he took them out into the wilderness and uprooted them from their routine. It says, so it was always. The cloud was there. The fire was there. And in verse 17, Numbers 9:17, it says, whenever the cloud was taken up from above the tabernacle, after the children of Israel would journey, and in the place where the cloud settled, there the children of Israel would pitch their tents. At the command of the Lord, the children of Israel would journey, and at the command of the Lord, they would camp. As long as the cloud stayed above the tabernacle, they remained in camps. Even when the cloud continued long, many days above the tabernacle, the children of Israel kept the charge of the Lord and did not journey. So it was when the cloud was above the tabernacle, a few days, according to the command of the Lord, they would remain in camps. And according to the command of the Lord, they would journey. So it was when the cloud remained only from evening until morning. When the cloud was taken up in the morning, then they would journey, whether by day or by night. Whenever the cloud was taken up, they would journey. It says, whenever the cloud was taken from the tabernacle, whenever the cloud moved, they'd move. They didn't say, hey, hold on a second. We're not ready. They didn't say, actually, well, I don't know. They did complain a lot, so. But they had to move. They had to go. And God was saying, listen, I'm going to be here with you always, but you have to go also where I'm going. You have to stay where I'm staying. When I stop, will you stop? When I go, will you go? We'll see in the New Testament, actually, also, the cloud describes the presence of God. And Jesus, when he was transfigured, was overshadowed by a cloud. We see in Luke 9:34, it says, while he was saying this, a cloud came and overshadowed them. And they were fearful as they entered the cloud. This is the moment on the mountain where Jesus is there and preparing to go. Preparing to go where God had asked him to go. And this cloud came, was the presence of God. There's a cloud. And we may not be able to see it physically. But God's presence is with us. Sometimes we say, God, where's your presence? And I would say, or at least this is what I'm questioning myself, is like, if I ask God where his presence is it because he went and I didn't go? Or is it because he stayed and I didn't stay? Numbers 9:22. So continue on. It says, whether it was 2 days, a month, or a year that the cloud remained above the tabernacle, the children of Israel would remain encamped and not journey. 2 days, a whole month, or even a whole year, they would remain there and they wouldn't journey. At the command of the Lord, they remained encamped, and at the command of the Lord, they journeyed. They kept the charge of the Lord at the command of the Lord by the hand of Moses. Now, I don't know about you, but like whenever there's something being written down and something is spoken over and over and over, it's to emphasize a point. It's to try to get something through my thick skull whenever it says it over and over and over. And it says it 3 times here, and up in verse 18 and 20, it says it 3 more times. At the command of the Lord. Whether the cloud was there hovering and they stayed for 2 days, it even says, even just for 1 day, just rest your feet a little bit and we're going. A month or a year, at the command. What they did was at the command. It wasn't at the command of their bellies. It wasn't at the command of their sore feet. It wasn't in which they, at the command of the Lord, not at the command of what I am thinking would be best, but at the command of the Lord. They stayed at the command of the Lord. They moved. Whatever they did, it was because it was what he had spoken. We see in Abraham's life, and once he, and again I say this, that like in Hebrews we see, in Romans, like you see that they talk about our father Abraham by faith. He's remembered it at what happened when he trusted God, when he had that faith. And it didn't deter or get rid of God's promise or his command or God's will. It may have delayed it a little bit. But when he finally came to this moment where he moved, when God said, at the command of the Lord, he moved and went. Then God was able to continue to do so many great things. And we get to see the rest of the story and see the promise, command, what he wanted to do through Abraham. We get to see the rest of that story, and he didn't. But man, I may not be able to see, you may not be able to see the whole story, the rest of it, the finality. Hopefully we don't, because I believe that each and every one of us are called to something that goes way beyond us. Not just to our children and their children, but to the world around us that lasts, that continues on. But I want that to happen because I obeyed the command. I want us to understand. Will we be willing to dwell in tents? I'm not saying sell your house and buy a tent. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying, everybody says also, it's like if God tells me to go on the mission field, right, Jack? God tells me, I'll go. And God tells them, and they're like, well, you know, this is going to be a little difficult. I got a house, I got a car, I got a job. But God's, you see, the thing is if God is asking, if God is commanding us, if He is the one that is speaking to us, do we trust, do we know that whatever He has for us will be so much better than we can possibly acquire or keep for ourselves? Because I see that when Abraham moved, whenever he went, he dwelt in tents. But do you know what happened after he left? How God blessed him. The people that served him defeated armies. His family grew, and he didn't see it become the number of the stars in the sky, but we see that is what happened. But are we willing? Are we willing to dwell in tents? Are we willing to go when He says go? Are we willing to stay? Just as importantly, are we willing to stay when He says stay? Because I see it says in Genesis 12:3 where it speaks and it says, it's talking to Abram, it says, I want to bless you. I want to bless your family. He says, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. But this whole great plan that God had, He wanted to use Abram. He wanted to change his name from father of many to father of multitudes. That's what Abram to Abraham. Which I don't know about you, but having that name, father of many, and being in the place where he couldn't even have a child for so very long must have been so hard. But God even spoke that over him before he was born. But in the moment of God speaking, He says, hey, actually, I'm going to change your name just a little bit. I'm going to add an H and an A. Because I don't just want you to be the father of many. I want you to be the father of multitudes, of this great thing that I've called you to. In the same way, He wants to speak those things over us. He has spoken those things over you. And I don't know about you, but I see different ways where I haven't fully trusted, maybe brought along a relative or stayed a little too long whenever he was moving, or moved a little bit when he was staying. And I don't want to do that anymore. I want to go. I want us to. The team can come back up, and I want there's even been just like many things in the past number of months and this past year, these questions, these things that I've been feeling, and you're like, God, come on, you've spoken these things. I believe that this is what you've said. I believe God's speaking to me, saying, hey, yeah, I've spoken those things. I've spoken those things over you. But if you truly just put it all on the altar, are you willing to dwell in a tent? Are you willing to not just be comfortable and understand what all is going on or know where everything's going to come from? Are you willing to trust me? And I believe that he's speaking that to all of us. I believe that he wants to speak it to his church, all of his church. Because I believe that he wants to do something great. I know he does. I know he wants good and to change hearts, lives of everyone. I believe he wants to move in a way that is something so miraculous and outside of the box that people just know it's God. But I'm wondering if we've gotten too comfortable in the way that we are doing things to where now we're living in a place that has foundations. So we're like, well, God, what we do is we do it this way. Well, God, we've always, this might be a hard one, but we've always done it this way, or this is how it happened back in the day. I'd love God to do things the same, and I can see things in my life and how he did something and how he moved, and I can say, God, do that again. And he's like, well, actually, I want it to be different because I want it to be greater. But if you're looking for that same thing I did in you, or you want me to do this specific thing, how am I going to really do what I want to do? Because you won't be flexible enough to go when I say go.